Welcome. And I just want to say a word of thanks to those who are here tonight. We have two fabulous speakers, Amy Perry, who is an autism resource specialist who has been with us for many years, and she has just such a great wealth of knowledge. She has a daughter who's on the spectrum, and you will hear probably a little bit about her throughout this presentation. And we also have Felicia Williams. She is our resource and connection specialist, and she has a son on the spectrum, and she too has some great information to share with you. I think you're really going to enjoy this. So without further ado, I'm going to let Felicia Williams start our presentation.
Thank you so much, Judy. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, David, for that. So first, I just want to say good evening and thank you all for joining us for the Puberty and Autism webinar. Amy and I are so excited. In fact, we had talked earlier today with one another about this and just how this is a long overdue discussion and how it is a very important topic, but is a very difficult thing for a lot of our families to talk about, even for us to talk about. So we both are very excited to be presenting this with you tonight. Next slide, please. So just to give you a basic overview and to introduce to you what to expect tonight, this webinar is solely about puberty, and we will address how to provide guidance for children with autism. Here we will discuss some very awkward things to talk about with our children. We will be talking about things candidly and be very transparent with our own experiences. But basically, we want to make sure that you all walk away feeling empowered as parents to support our children as they go through puberty. Next slide, please. So here are our objectives for tonight. With puberty, we'll be addressing the physical changes to expect in our children, how to prepare our children for their changing anatomy. We will also address how in puberty development for children with autism, how it's same and different for typical peers. And we will also touch on hygiene and etiquette and how all that plays a part in puberty. Next slide, please. So Amy will speak on girls, autism, and puberty.
All right, thank you, Felicia. I'm Amy Perry, and I think we sort of done introductions. I have 3 daughters, so there's a lot of girls. You know, they are all past puberty. We have lived through it, but my middle daughter has classic autism. You may or may not hear her in the background tonight. And as an autism resource specialist, whenever I would speak, even if I was talking about IEP meetings, invariably there would be somebody who would come up to me after the presentation and say, "Can I ask you a personal question about your daughter?" And I would smile and I would say, "Yes, we can talk about her period." And that's what the question was about, of how did we handle it. So this presentation is for all of those moms and dads who came up to me and said, "Hey, how do I do this?" Because there's a lot that goes on with puberty, both with boys and girls. And I'm so glad to have Felicia as part of this, because she's kind of been the missing piece. This webinar has existed for a little while, dealing with just girls, but it's absolutely incomplete. So I'm so thrilled that Felicia and I are doing this, and we're going to also talk about boys. But I like to say that puberty can take your little girl from this sweet little angel to sometimes this. A teenager who's having a hard day. Both of these were my daughter. So puberty brings about a lot of changes, doesn't it, Felicia?
Absolutely, Amy. It does. And I don't know if you want to speak on this or if you want me to speak on it. I am happy to.
I forget where we're at, so we'll just some things that go on that do come with puberty are certainly acne. Sometimes that pimple is the first sign. Sometimes boys grow that telltale mustache. Facial hair starts to appear. Girls begin to develop breasts. Mood swings are probably one of the telltale signs, and sometimes parents are having a hard time with a child who's 10 or 11 years old, and invariably the question comes up, where are they at with puberty? And parents will say, oh yeah, I forgot, that happens with autism too. And it does. Puberty and the mood swings and the changes and all the things that go along with becoming a teenager, that happens for autism too. And we'll see those things. The voice can change. And definitely the genitals are something that change a lot during puberty. And this can be a source of a lot of anxiety for a lot of parents. So this is why Felicia and I are braving this topic to talk to you about it tonight. I have sort of an epitaph that I joke about, and it's that the good news is you can survive anything. And the bad news is you can survive anything. A lot of times when parents will ask me about puberty and going through all those changes, and what did you do that worked? And I joke that I worried a lot about it, and everything turned out to be okay and not really a big deal. So all of the worrying must have worked. So that's probably bad advice, but I hope you know it's meant in humor. So we have survived puberty. Haven is now 25, so we're well through puberty and into adulthood, and we can smile about it now. And this change has brought about more independence for her in lots of areas of her life. We've seen her communication improve dramatically. Haven has severe autism, level 3 autism. And what's interesting to me is that we've worked with her whole life, but she made the most dramatic progress during the second decade of her life. Despite everything that we did in the first decade, the real payout came in the teen years. So a lot of times parents say, I don't know how I'm going to do this with a teenager. But if you've been working with your child, if you've been doing therapy, this is often a time where all of the investment that you've made in a child really begins to show itself in an amazing way. Our most progress and growth happened between probably 10 and 20. It's really been impressive. So don't shy away from this time period, because you will see the investment you have made in your child come to fruition. The other thing is teenagers are classically known, neurotypical and beyond, as being lazy. It's true, and they like to sleep. And if you've had a child with autism who's been very active and been a real challenge, sometimes those teenage hormones calm everything down and they start to sleep and things get a little bit better. So sometimes things definitely mellow out on the other side of puberty. They still have autism, but the challenges of hyper 5 or 6 year old that we once upon a time had, it looks different on the other side. And sometimes that's a very welcome thing. Changes that come for girls, we certainly see height and growth spurts. We see the hips begin to expand, breasts develop, acne, as we talked about, mood and social communication changes. Body odor begins to develop. They're going to grow hair under their arms and in their pubic area. And sometimes their texture of their hair can change. This was one of the things that really surprised me. Haven, for most of her childhood, had straight black hair. And all of a sudden her hair started getting frizzy and I didn't understand what was going on. And my hairdresser enlightened me and said, it's puberty. She's going through puberty and that's changing her hair. I didn't know that that was something that could happen, but it did. And now that she's past puberty, her hair is not anywhere near as curly as it once was. It's gone back to straight. So hormones have a huge impact on the body.
Absolutely. And it's no different from boys. It's the exact same thing. And in a lot of ways, it's very obvious. Of course, you have the body odor, which, is very noticeable. But then what's not so noticeable is how the body and the mind and the state of flux with boys, how that impacts boys. I think it's easier to identify that with girls, but boys start to have their moods too, their angst as well, as they're going through puberty. There's also an increased sense of awareness and energy. And a part of that is that testosterone that is starting to show itself during this phase of their lives. Next, please, Amy. Hair growth, facial hair, chest, groin area, underarms, a huge thing for boys, especially the facial hair. And it's important, that they know that this is normal, because when they start growing hair in these areas that are not usual for them, if we don't talk to them about it, they may think it is unusual. So it's important that we help them to know this is normal. This is what happens to everyone, and this is what should be happening to you at this phase of your life. You'll also see height and growth spurts. And girls typically go through this part sooner than boys. It depends on when our guys enter that stage of puberty. My son, he is 13 and has not quite even started yet. So his sister, who is 10, is taller than him. And I know that once it hits him, he will grow and he will be looking down on her. But for right now, she's enjoying being taller than him and me. So there you go with that. And then the muscle development, that's also that testosterone doing its thing in our boys when they are starting to change. Their voice will deepen, which really is just mind blowing for us parents. And then they also have trouble with controlling their impulses. And again, that's that hormonal thing that happens in our boys when they are going through puberty. So that is absolutely normal. Then you have also those sexual hormones that starts to play, and that comes with change in mood, more stimulation for the guys that they may or may not understand, and you may not even expect it in your child. So there will be behaviors, there will be sexual interests in ways that you won't even see coming, and even, a draw to activity that you may not see coming. But we want to assure you that that is normal. And if that does happen with your child, it is okay. It is normal. So I just wanted to make sure to stress that.
So I guess when it comes to what do we tell our children about puberty, and the thing, kind of all of the different things that go with it. It's important to keep things simple. We don't have to give too much information at once. When talking about things, and we'll go into more depth about this, about dealing with your period and those sorts of things, focusing on the steps. You want to use information that's appropriate to their level of understanding. Things like visual supports and videos and object lessons can be really helpful, as can observation. And we'll talk more about that in a minute.
And I just want to second that with the same with our boys. We want to keep it simple. We want to explain what's happening to their body physically and emotionally. It's important that we don't shy away from that, to help them understand that it's common. This happens to all boys. Then there are these unspoken rules of society, and we need to educate our sons about that. And we'll talk about that a little further in the webinar. But that is something I wanted to just mention for you guys to keep in mind. You want to be specific about the change puberty brings. And as Amy said, using those social stories and those visual supports are going to be a lifesaver when it comes to talking about these complex items. And then using appropriate language to his level of understanding. And that's kind of tricky, right? Because, sometimes we feel awkward about saying what it is, saying those body parts, and talking about using those actual terms, right? And we want to animate them a little bit. We want to make them playful and light, but we have to remember that our children take what we say literally, and we want to make sure that we are direct, and we want to make sure that we get comfortable with saying those uncomfortable words. So just wanted to stress that here as well. So as we're looking here, you're probably like, okay, now we know we need to do this. Where do we start? And a great place to start as we're addressing puberty is hygiene. Hygiene, it changes, our body changes, and how we care for our body will become evident during puberty. And it's important that we help our children to learn those basic skills on self-care, on body care. And here we have an example of a book that teaches you about body, your body parts. This book in particular is for girls, but we have other resources that we'll share with you later. But it's important, to help our children identify body odor, what that is. They might be okay with it. They might not recognize it, but teaching them those concrete skills on, clean clothes and washing our bodies will help take care of the body odor and that sort of thing.
It makes me think of a story that a parent told me recently, where her child came running, or her tween came to her and said, "Mom, did you know that other people can smell me when I stink?" And he was so surprised by that. But sometimes that social thinking piece, it's important to know that just because you can smell you, other people could smell that too. And it may not occur to us that we need to explain that to our kids, but it's not necessarily, it may be an important thing to point out.
Absolutely. And it's an important like social component, right? Because if it's one thing for them to know, but then for them to know that other people know and then not know how that impacts them socially. So it's important that we help them see like the big picture and not just the little tiny things. And so here with boys, body odor, which is a common problem for boys in puberty. Next. Yeah, so one way to help with that is teaching about taking regular showers. And I know that for some of our children, showers, that sensory can be quite a bit, but I guess in what way you can to focus on those self-care skills, if not a shower, at least washing what I like to say, those hot spots, those spots that are going to smell, making sure that they understand now is the time. It's important that we at least hit these things. If because what you don't want is to traumatize your child for the sake of getting a shower, but you do want to teach them that it's important that you keep these areas clean. Wearing deodorant is another thing. Wearing clean clothes is another thing. You can keep your body clean, but if they keep recycling something that they've worn all week, it's not going to matter. So helping to stress those things is important. Body hair, same thing. We want to be aware of the different types of body hair boys can grow. And we have to simplify that for them and teach them those things where, it's on your head, but it also grows. It will grow now on your face. It will also possibly grow on your chest. It will grow in your genital area. And to help them to know this, this is normal. It's normal. Someone had shared a story with me where their son was pulling out his pubic hair because he didn't know that was normal. He couldn't understand why hair was growing there, and it was not discussed, so he didn't know. So that's just an example of how it's important that we help them to know this is normal. It's supposed to be there as it's growing there, and what that means for them. You want to also teach them about body maintenance, which is what we've talked about already, and then encourage them to ask questions when they're unsure about what they see, because sometimes we might not know right away what is happening to their bodies, and we don't want them to feel shameful to talk about it or weird to talk about it. For our verbal children, it is okay for us to create a welcoming environment for them to talk about it. And in ways that we notice for our nonverbal children, same thing. We want to make this a safe place for them to be able to question, what they're seeing and to educate them about it. So here, hygiene routines, here you can see an actual visual. We have a picture of someone putting on deodorant, which is an excellent way to support a routine for body care, for self-care. And then you can see here also like a visual book that has cues on how to use deodorant. Again, these are tools that you can create yourself. You can reach out to an autism resource specialist. They can link you to different aids, social stories, and visual supports to help you with this. For my son, he responds great to pictures. So having pictures is a great way to support a hygiene routine. And here again, this is a step-by-step visual support. It shows you like deodorant, what it is, take off the top, put it under your arm, like step by step, you can see what you do with it. And this is a great way to teach just in addressing body odor, how to use deodorant. So there are so many different ways you can do this. You can use pictures. You can take your own pictures. You can take pictures of your child doing this so they can see. There's so many, unique ways to do this. But basically what we're trying to say is it's not impossible to teach our children how to take care of their bodies and to have good hygiene.
And one thing I like about this visual is it tells you how many times to rub it. And you may have to figure out, rub it, 2 swipes, 3 swipes. Sometimes they put on deodorant and you find a child with deodorant caked under their arm because they don't, how much do you put on? So you say, I think 2 or 3 swipes we felt like that was pretty good, because just touching a bar of deodorant under your arm, it might not cut it, right?
Right.
So giving that visual to know what does it really mean to put deodorant on. It means you did 2 swipes, 3 swipes to do that.
And Amy, I did want to share a funny story with my son. It's also good to have that so you'll know what not to do with deodorant. Because my son was like, oh, this is fun. This is a crayon. And so he started like marking up his clothes and everything with it because he enjoyed swiping it. So it's also a good way to teach them what not to do with this tool.
Oh, yes, exactly. Am I doing visual schedules? So
Yes,
we decided? All right.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the reasons I'm going to talk about the importance of visual schedules, because we're going to get to some things that are messy and uncomfortable and aren't what we normally talk about. And that's probably why you're here, is how am I going to cope with something so challenging? So we're going to start by teaching you some tools in terms of using visual schedules and visual supports. This is the lifeline for people with autism. This is the evidence-based practice that shows us this is what works for people with autism. And even if some of these things may not completely be necessary, I hope by the time I'm done talking about this, you'll see that when it comes to tackling some uncomfortable topics, that you've got some tools in place to make that easier to do. You don't want to wait until your daughter's period starts to try to teach her how to use a visual schedule. That may be too much information all at once. If you are headed into puberty, but not quite there yet, these are things you want to start doing now. You want to make this part of your normal, not just because of puberty, because it helps people with autism live well. And it's the key to any measure of independence in adulthood. So visual schedules and social stories are important to use consistently with your child, and it gives you a format to teach a wide variety of skills. And visuals across the spectrum, visuals cross the communication barrier to make things easier for people with autism. We can tell them all they want, but by seeing it, it makes it more concrete. It goes into a different channel of the brain, and it's a very helpful way to teach. There are so many different ways and places to find visual schedules, and Felicia's absolutely right. You can reach out to the autism resource specialist in your area, and they can help you find these tools. We're going to link some of these in the presentation, and you'll be able to download the handout at the end of this, so you can get these links. But Google Images is a really great place to start. Even just searching something like visual schedule. There's websites, there's lots of tools we're going to give you to look for different routines that you can teach your child, whether it's putting on deodorant or brushing your teeth or washing your hands. Those are all much more comfortable things to teach with a visual schedule versus more personal care routines that we're going to talk about tonight, right? Those are easier things to teach. Social stories are another good way to teach people with autism and to help them prepare for new or unexpected experiences. So there are some companies that publish some books like I Have My Period, and it's got visuals and it tells the story of essentially what happens when you get your period. Sometimes if this is uncomfortable to talk about, having a book that helps you introduce the topic and then you can discuss it or you can show them, that can be a really helpful thing. Visual schedules can be as simple or as complex as you need them to be. You usually want to start simple and build up from there. You can use board maker, icon pictures, real pictures, whatever objects, whatever it is that makes sense for your child. First then is a really simple way. First, we're going to do this. First, we're going to clean up, then we're going to go outside. So these are just examples of all different kinds of visual schedules. You can buy a laminator for around $20 at Walmart. I didn't know that, so I was thrilled to learn that. I was under the impression they were a lot more expensive. You can also use clear contact paper. You don't have to use any of that. Laminating makes things last longer, but sometimes it's not worth getting hung up on if that's a barrier for you. These are all ways to help your child gain independence in moving through life. There are apps that also help you do this. There's one called I Do Hygiene, and it's really nice because it has videos that model things like taking a shower, brushing your teeth, washing your face, and it shows you what to do. Some children do really well with watching video modeling. They watch someone else do it, and then they're able to do it. So I Do Hygiene is an app that can be a useful tool, and it's another kind of visual support. There's also, again, we talked about laminating and picture cards, but sometimes an electronic schedule, depending on your child and the technology that they use and that they're comfortable with. There are apps to help do this. So this is another form of visual schedule, checklists, those sorts of things. They're all helpful tools. This one I think comes from an app called Visual Schedule Planner. I think I've linked it here. So there's definitely options out there. The right thing to use is the thing that works for you and your child. So I really like this chart of when does puberty begin? And essentially it happens between the ages of 7 and 14. It's a little bit different for everyone. And it's really interesting to see the evolution. I wish I had an equivalent drawing for boys because it does such a nice job. But puberty is happening before menstruation begins for girls, or other kinds of changes happen. In boys, PMS and even cramps are possible before a girl even begins to have her period. When will a girl start? I think most of you know, it's not uncommon for a daughter to start around the same age that other women in her family does. It kind of goes in trends. It's not an absolute. There can be differences, but the age that you started may be similar to the age where your daughter starts her period or where her siblings started. That's a clue. I've also heard people say when a girl gets to around the 100-pound point, there's the right ratio of body fat, that also is a factor. It's not absolute. Don't take it only for what it's worth. But those are indicators that you're getting closer to that. That said, if you've ever been a mother of a daughter, you are probably aware that PMS can happen. The irritability can happen long before her cycle ever actually does. So anyway, I think this is the ultimate icon or representation of cramps and PMS. if you are a woman or you live with one, cramps and PMS are common symptoms. So don't forget about them with your daughter. She may not be able to explain how she's feeling. There are sensory differences in autism. So people with autism don't always even feel pain in the same way. They may know they're in pain, but they not be able to locate where it's coming from in their body. So she may not be able to explain how she's feeling or tell you she's in pain. One of the things that was really revelatory to me, and we're just going to get down and personal, is I thought cramps always came after your period started. And because that was normal for me and it was normal for friends that I knew. And my other two daughters, the one older and younger than Haven, both of them said, we don't have cramps when we have our period. We have cramps the week before. We have horrible cramps the week before our period. Once we start, we're fine. I was blown away. I had no idea. And I realized that the week before Haven's period, when she was so miserable, she probably had cramps, and I did not know. So her sisters actually taught me something. I assumed their bodies would be just like mine because I gave birth to them, but that's not always the case. So if you're in the camp with me of thinking that cramps only come with periods, they can come before. Now I know. So just be aware that all of that stuff can be going on. Here we go. I put this in the presentation. Some women feel cramps before they start and others not until after it happens. So if your child can't communicate very well, how will you know if they have cramps? Sometimes the signs are obvious. They're holding their stomach or they're doubled over. Other times you have to guess. With my daughter, we saw an increase in self-injurious behavior. And sometimes that indicates that she's in pain when she would hit or bite herself. We talked to her doctor because we weren't quite sure what was going on. And in the early stages, he said, if you think she has cramps, it's okay. Or if you think she's in pain, it's okay to give her Advil. I'm not giving you medical advice. You should talk to your doctor. But because she couldn't say I'm in pain, we charted her cycle and we kept track. And when we thought that it was that she was beginning to not act like herself, we would do some Advil. And oftentimes we realized, yeah, that actually seems to have helped. She's feeling much happier now, 30 or 40 minutes later. So sometimes things like that can be helpful. The same remedies we use for ourselves can be helpful for our children, even if they can't communicate it in the same way. Remember that remedies like a hot water bottle and things like that, that can also be comforting. They can also feel good. So you may need to teach your daughter some of the things that help. It is good to get used to tracking your daughter's cycle, making a note of when she's more emotional, even if she hasn't started yet, starting to keep track of this. There's a website and there's apps that can help you do this, and you don't have to, but it's helpful. It's also not uncommon that women who live together or spend a lot of time together will sync up. And Haven had a way of making everyone else sync up with her. Teachers would tell us this. The staff that would work with her, they would be like, yeah, I'm on the same cycle as Haven now. She switched me. So it's interesting how that goes. Another thing we found, and it's kind of uncanny, but if Haven isn't on her cycle, and if one of her sisters would start their cycle at a different time than hers, Haven would become irritable. So there's a lot of women's superstition about these kinds of things, but it's not, I'm just telling you, it's not impossible that someone else's, that your period, even if your daughter's not having hers, it could impact her. It's some of that deep women mystery stuff that that's never going to be in the textbooks, but there's something to it. There's something to it that we can't quite explain. It is normal for a girl's cycle to be irregular for the first year or so, but you should always keep in touch with your child's doctor if you have concerns. My daughter had 2 periods when she started, and then she didn't have any more periods for 9 months. She wasn't pregnant, she just didn't. She was right, she was skinny, and she was right at that 90 to 100 pound mark. And I don't know quite what it was, but her body just took a little bit of time before it did that again. And from then on, she was fairly regular. But that was at least our experience getting on. So anyway, so now I know this is what a lot of you are here for. So what about menstruation? Okay, don't worry. I'm going to try to keep this as factual and non-gross as possible. Don't worry, I'm not going to show you anything gross. So how do you prepare your daughter for menstruation? Hopefully you've already been practicing visual schedules and those kinds of things. There are two different camps to go in. One is lots of preparation. It can reduce fear and panic. You may have a child who needs lots of extra time to adapt to new changes in routine. They may need practice and repetition, social stories, all that stuff. You may have a child that you know that you need to give a lot of preparation to, because not being prepared is going to upset them. But there's another kind of child, and you may have this kind of child, where minimal preparation is better. It reduces anxiety. If they don't know what you're talking about, if they don't understand it, if it's too abstract for them, it may be better to not tell them too much, other than your body's changing, that's normal, it's okay. Haven would not necessarily understand or comprehend those types of materials, and sometimes the deal with it as it comes approach. I talked a little bit about observation, and that was one of the things I did. And I'm just going to be a woman here talking to moms and dads. But one of the things that I realized that I should do, and I did this from time to time, not on a regular basis, but I would allow, if Haven was in the bathtub and I was in the bathroom, I told you this would be TMI, right? And I needed to change my pad, I would let her see. I won't let anybody else in the world see this, but I wanted her to see that this was normal. I wanted her to be aware that this was something that could happen, so she wouldn't be scared. And I said, this is what happens when you get older. This is part of growing up, and it doesn't hurt, and it's okay. And then I would throw it away. End of story. And I know there's probably people cringing, and I'm sorry about that. For my daughter with severe autism, that was the best way for me to show her that this was something that was happened, and it was okay. Very private. It was my best option. And she didn't freak out when she started. And I thought that I would freak out when she started, but the day that she started her period, I will never forget, because my husband had a heart attack and he was in surgery. And I was in the hospital waiting room, and I got a call from the teacher who didn't know what was going on. And she told me, Haven started her period. Can you bring pads and clothes to school? So numb as I could be with the craziness going on in my life, I left the hospital because he was going to be in surgery for a while. And I went and I bought the pads and the clothes and took them to the school. And I went back to the hospital, and Haven was okay. And my husband was okay. And I was okay. And I didn't have the time or the energy to freak out on that particular day because there was too much else going on. And I think it was kind of a blessing in disguise. And we just rolled with it, because autism really teaches you that you sometimes just have to roll with what comes. And that was absolutely a day where I learned I don't have time to make a fuss over this. I don't have time to fall apart. This is just one more thing. And I think that was good for me. I think that was important for me to learn that we could go on. So I know some of you are probably worried, is this going to be gross? When my daughter starts her period, what am I going to do? So you already know, you potty trained your children by now, more than likely. Parenthood is not for the faint-hearted. There are messy parts of parenthood. But I want you to know that with planning and preparation, it's actually possible for this to be no big deal. Remember, I told you I worried a lot and everything turned out okay? It's actually not that big of a deal. With a few key things in mind. Social stories, again, and visuals make this process easier. And there's a link here to embarrassing questions about pads. This can be a tool that you can use to talk with your daughter. One of the things I figured out very early on is showers, baths, whatever you need to do are very helpful. We added a sprayer attachment to our shower. And that was a really helpful thing to do. Water washes away a multitude of things. So if your child only takes a bath, you might want to begin practicing showers, or at least allowing you to hose them down with a handheld thing. They may not like the water on their head, but can they learn to wash their body with a handheld shower or tolerate you doing that? That can be a really helpful tool. Sometimes they have some that fit over the bathtub spigot. I think that's what we had at first, to try it. So we didn't have to install anything with a plumber. You can just get something that goes over your bathtub faucet and do it that way. In the event of a mess or a disaster, that became our go-to. If something got messy, we just got in the shower. That's just, water. Sometimes it was clothes and all, and then you can just sort the rest out later. But that's the easiest, fastest way to clean up things, especially if they're uncomfortable things. We made morning showering, at least a rinse off in the shower in the morning, and then again, a shower at night. That became our routine for the week of her period. She knew she got in the shower. I got her up in the morning, a little extra time, and tossed her in, and I rinsed her off. It was just easier. And it was better to make that a normal thing during that week. Sometimes it probably wasn't that big of a deal, but it was better to make that our normal. And I knew she was clean, and that was helpful for me. So what kinds of products do you use? All women have different preferences. Your daughter might like something different than you. I immediately thought that she would like the products that I like. And I learned a lot about things. I just thought that wings were the way to go. But I think if you're a woman, you know that sometimes wings can go wrong. And the placement of wings and the adhesion of wings, like wings are your friend until they're not your friend.
Amen. Amen.
Yes, thank you. So wings were an extra step. Placing the pad was a thing, but wings were an extra step. So I actually learned pretty quickly, this is complicated. Also, for many brands of wings, and if you're a guy, you probably don't know this, but the wings are folded over on top. So there's an extra sticker you have to take off, and then you fold the wings underneath. Well, my daughter didn't understand that you need to take off that middle sticker. So one time I found, so it was an extra step. We also had issues. I have another slide in a minute to talk about flushing. Sometimes super thin pads are tempting to flush, and do not fall into that temptation ever. So I actually learned for her, and everybody's different. And there are teen products. All of these things have happened now, and I'm seeing all these ads for this company called Red Dot, where you can order like a get ready for your period kit for your daughter, and it's got all different products and sizes and things like that. Whatever works for you is good. But something that surprised me was that thicker pads worked better. They were easier to place. They were much less likely to be flushed. So the old-fashioned thicker pads were better for a long time. The thinner pads weren't as good. But they come in all different kinds of shapes and sizes, and teen sizes that are smaller, all of that. So take that into account, and just be aware that what works for her doesn't work for everybody. I learned a couple of cool things though, like I realized preloading pads was a really helpful thing. There was a time where I had to travel for work, and my husband was going to be home with the girls, and it was the week of Haven's period, and he thought he was going to die. He didn't. But one of the strategies we worked out was to just preload those underwear. We just bought a new pack of underwear, and we put pads in them. He lined them up like a dad does, and just boom, 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 he got them all ready. And then I think he ended up throwing everything away, underwear and all. And for that particular week, it just wasn't that, we just dealt with it. It wasn't that much. Sometimes if something is horrible, you just throw it away anyway. But we preloaded the pads and the underwear so that he didn't have to do any uncomfortable bending over on the toilet or anything like that. And he's a guy, so he's really not used to it. Another thing we did was we drew an outline in her underwear. So you can kind of see in this picture how I drew the top arc and the bottom arc, so she could have guidelines onto where to put that thing, because Haven isn't necessarily, she's only detail oriented about certain things. And this was one of the things that it took her a while to figure out, that how you did it mattered, because you figure out really quick if you did it wrong, it won't feel right. So these guidelines helped her figure out how and where to put her pad in her underwear, so that it wasn't too far forwards or too far back, because the wrong place is not going to feel right. And it might not do its job, and we don't want that to happen. Also telling the front of the underwear from the back, those sorts of things. We put a little smiley face in the front, so if she was sitting on the toilet, she had a little smiley face to orient her to what was going on. There are other options that people have asked me about, things like Thinks period underwear. They're expensive. And they don't like to go in the dryer, from what I've read. So you're looking at $20 to $30 a pair. That's a lot of money. And if you have to hand wash them or hand dry them, that's a lot of extra work and maintenance. So there's nothing wrong with it. That is one way to do it. It may be in certain situations, that's a better one. Somebody told me that Thinx has just come out with a Thinx bathing suit that you could wear while you swim and would be extra absorbent. So I think that's a brilliant invention. Sometimes people ask me about things like tampons or cups. Again, I think that's a woman's decision or your daughter's decision. And if she has the ability and the motor skills and the understanding to do that, and then that's her choice. But if you have a child who has more severe impairment, and that's going to be outside the realm of things, pads are where you stay. We don't need to go. We don't need to go any further than that. Another thing we learned pretty quickly was changing. Regular pad changing is critical to a non-gross experience. I made the executive decision almost at the beginning because I thought, how am I going to teach her when to change her pad? If you're a woman, you know there is really nothing worse than a pad that has gone past its expiration point. So I realized teaching her that judgment call wasn't going to be the best way to do it. So I taught her to change her pad every time she used the bathroom, whether she needed to or not. This was when it was time for a pad. If she peed, whether there was whatever was on the pad, it got thrown away and we put on a new pad. And we never really got to the gross point. So I deeply believe in that experience, especially for eliminating the gross factor. If you have a child who's not going to be able to tell, this pad looks full, I think I need to change it, just change it every time. You're spending a little bit of extra money. You may not be getting at the maximum out of your maxi pads. I was willing to do that because having my child be in a dirty pad for too long, I couldn't live with that. So this was the choice that we made. Anyway, you can also change it on a schedule, teaching her every 2 to 4 hours, that sort of thing. But we used every time she used the bathroom. So the disposal etiquette is to fold up a pad and then wrap it in toilet paper. I think that's what most women are taught to do. And I knew that part of the process would be too complex for my daughter. And for some people, that's too many steps in getting that done accurately. Because if there's one thing nobody wants to see, it's a used pad. So Walmart bags became our friend. And I realized, well, she doesn't have the motor skills to fold up, to wrap up a pad and throw it away. She can rip the pad out, it's a sticker, right? And she can put it in a Walmart bag. So the early steps would be, she would rip it out and I would hold out the bag, she'd put it in the bag, I'd tie the bag shut, and we're good. Then we throw it away, end of story. And she learned that routine, and that also like derailed the whole concept of, oh, I should flush this. Nope, it goes in the bag. You can use I never touched her. I never had to touch her. Then I don't plan on having to. There are parents who have children who are not toilet trained and everything goes in the diaper. And so they ask, what do I do? Well, that's what you do. Everything goes in the diaper. You may need to change them more frequently. If your child's not toilet trained, but I don't think there's a practice to use an additional product in addition to, to a diaper or a pull up of that kind. That's just what you do. You clean up and you move on. So for us, we didn't have to get dirty. A strategy I learned later on, I wish I'd thought of this first, but it took a couple years. But using a paper bag, this has become my favorite strategy. And we switched to this because you can get a pack of paper bags at the grocery store. They'll last you a long time. And this was also good for sending supplies to school. So we could put a new pad in each bag. And it can be carried to the restroom discreetly. And then the used pad can be put in the paper bag, and the paper bag can be crumpled up and thrown away. So it's really easy, even at school, in public. She's got the new pad in the bag. It doesn't necessarily advertise to everyone what's going on. And she has a discreet way to dispose of it that she's familiar with. And it's a crumpled up paper bag. Nobody can see anything. And it's good. So I love paper bag strategy. That's become my favorite. But here's a sample plan. Daughter sits on the toilet and removes the pad from her underwear. Mom holds a plastic or paper bag. Daughter places the pad in the bag. Mom disposes of the bag. Mom provides a clean pad and coaches correct placement, or mom provides a pair of preloaded underwear with a new pad to change into, whatever ends up working. Although you do want to work towards those independent skills with your daughter. This is where having visuals of how to change your pad, having a visual schedule of what to do is going to be helpful for you, because you'll feel uncomfortable at first. You won't know what to do, or if dad is helping out. Having a system and having a visual gives you something concrete as well as them. And that helps us through those uncomfortable moments. I'm telling you, it's your lifeline. It is important to teach no flushing as part of the process. And that pads always go in the trash can. We put it in the bag and we put it in the trash can. It can be useful to teach them that a pad is also called a feminine product. And if your daughter does struggle with because you'll see in restrooms that no flushing of feminine products, right? And I heard about a young lady who said it's a pad, it's not a feminine product. Like, oh no, actually it's a feminine product is another word for a pad. So thick pads are less likely to get flushed, as I told you, but that's an important thing to make sure that they don't think that's something that goes in the toilet. So there are a couple of resources, like Taking Care of Myself. There's a link to this guide that you can use for personal care and hygiene and all the things that Felicia and I have been talking to you about. There's a great book. This is a free download on puberty, a guide for teenagers with autism. This is another book of Secret Girls Business. Not all the books here are necessarily written for autism, because there may be people with autism who are able to do this. You know, who these books and materials will still be very valid for. It doesn't have to necessarily be for autism. The Growing Up Guide for Girls, I think there's also one for boys. In middle school, The Stuff Nobody Tells You About. A girl with high functioning autism shares her experience. So there's some good tools out there. And I know Felicia has some stuff for boys at the end. So now we're going to get to talk about the other uncomfortable topic. And that's sexuality and masturbation. We're going to get this done, right, Teresa? So I know I was just going to give everybody a minute to cringe. But yeah, we're going to talk about that because it's important, and that's part of it. And the one thing that I've learned is that a person's sexuality is blissfully unimpaired by autism. Sexuality, sex hormones, sex feelings, sex drive, sex interest, sex, that may be the most normal part about your child, and that may not fit together very well with the autism and all of the other pieces. But the same feelings and sensations that drive the rest of the world, your child has a human body, and they will also experience those things regardless of whether or not they understand them. Sexuality is part of who they become. It is part of them that develops during puberty. So hang on, lost something. All right. Like I said, these biological and physiological functions are completely unimpaired by autism. They happen anyway. And I know a lot of us were probably hoping that that wouldn't happen. Whether or not they understand it, their body is doing its own thing. And your child will have their own inner sex drive. And they will probably learn to masturbate on their own. Mother Nature is a very good teacher, and it is a normal and healthy thing to do, but we're going to talk about how we do all of this within the context of autism so it stays normal and healthy and safe. All right, go ahead.
Absolutely. So, and I just want to second with what Amy just said. Like a lot of times, because of the challenges, you know, autism brings with our children, some of us feel that our children are asexual, as though there is just absolutely no sexual anything there. But as Amy just said, Mother Nature has a way of showing us that no, that is not true at all. And it's important that we as parents, we become comfortable with that, and actually comfortable with actually talking about sex and autism. Now, this particular webinar is not about sex. We are talking about puberty, but a part of puberty is sexual development. and masturbation, which is a very, you know, uncomfortable word to say, as well as many other things, is a part of puberty. And so I think the more that we as parents learn to not cringe about it, it will empower us to help our children. And it will empower us also to be comfortable with supporting them through this part of their development. So, sexual development in boys, again, terrified to talk about, I'm sure. But your son's sexual development is unique to him. So there is no exact science to this. Every person is different, it is individualized. But the important thing to know is that there is going to be sexual development for your son. That is a given. So it's also important to talk about sexual development with him, so that it is not a shameful thing. It feels shameful because it's taboo in our society to talk about it. Culturally, there are all these different dynamics that are tied into it, and that's what makes it uncomfortable. There's stigma around it. But the more we get comfortable with coming to the table and talking about this, the better it is for us to prepare our children. So we want to create a positive and supportive environment. We want to provide accurate information about sexuality. And a prime example of that is, as we're talking about body parts, you know, referring to a part as a banana could cause a lot of problems. We have to really be concrete and use factual information, because again, our children will take it literally, and that could just be a big problem down the road. We want to support him when he expresses his feelings or asks questions about sex. We'll hear about it from, around their peers or just being in the world. And so it's important that we don't shy away from the opportunity to support our children in that way. And we want to definitely talk about what's appropriate when it comes to touch and boundaries. And that's not a topic we're going to get into heavily here. But Amy will tell you about this wonderful webinar that's coming up that will talk about safety and appropriateness when it comes to touch and boundaries. But it is something that is linked to sexual development. That stimulation that happens that leads to masturbation that you may or may not even know about with your child will happen because Mother Nature will do its thing. But it's important, and I will stress to you as a parent, it is important that we know this is something we're going to have to talk about, because if we don't, for our children, they can hurt themselves. For our children, they can get bad information. And so it's important that we, as their caregivers, become comfortable with talking about this and addressing it. So erection, that is a word that again makes us cringe. Masturbation, another word that makes us cringe. But I will tell you, this is not a topic that will not impact our children. So we as parents, we really have to become comfortable with it, and we have to learn how to talk about it with our children and not be ashamed to do so. Next slide, please. So again, this erection thing and masturbation and oh no, and then with our boys. So the thing with our boys is their bodies respond whether they want it to or not. And they may not even be aware of what's happening. So it's important that we find ways, as Amy had shared earlier, using social stories and visuals to help them understand what's happening, and that will take some planning on your part too, with what they wear as far as the clothing. Heavier clothing might be helpful with, as you can see in this picture, there's some tinting there. And again, for mothers, is like a foreign topic altogether, right? I'm a mom. I don't even know how to even begin to explain this in a way that I can say I have experienced this. But as mothers and as fathers, and I'm so sorry, my dog is barking right now, but what I will say is there are ways that we can prepare ourselves, and these social stories can help us. These visual supports can help us. And then thinking about how we purchase things for our children, what they wear, and how to teach them how to be discreet, to be alert that this is happening and this is what I do. Do I cover myself up? Do I sit down? In other words, the more we talk about it and prepare them, the more they are not scared, the more they're not afraid, and the more they're not shamed, because it's normal. And that's the thing we want to stress here. It is absolutely normal. And it's not, something that we have to shy away from. Learning to say the word erection and not want to hide is important. And saying the word masturbation, oh my goodness, it's okay. It is okay. So I definitely want to stress that here. Next slide, please, Amy. The other thing I wanted to address, and particularly with our boys, is this hidden curriculum is what we call it, and puberty. And hidden curriculum, it really is about those social rules that exist that we don't teach and we don't ever talk about. So we talk about, okay, have you had the talk? But we don't talk about the hidden curriculum things. And a prime example of that I will use is the rules around going to the bathroom for guys. Now, I'm a female, and I was blown away when I learned that there are rules. Like, you don't stand right next to a person when you're at a urinal. That is taboo. You don't do that. You don't pull your pants all the way down to your ankles. Again, as a female, you don't think about that. And so you don't think these are things I need to talk to my son about, as he becomes independent, on what's appropriate and how to protect himself. And not to mention just the things that's in there. Like, there's a urine chip, I believe. I might not be saying that right, but you don't touch that. Again, something I would not have a clue about, but I learned about that by attending a hidden curriculum workshop. And this is an example of where the hidden curriculum impacts puberty for boys, and how, educating ourselves as parents can help us. Oh, yeah, David said urine cake. Thank you. I knew I didn't say it right, but these are ways that we help our boys when it comes to puberty. And so appropriate touch, appropriate place, an appropriate place, meaning masturbation. Where is that appropriate? Understanding consent. And we're not going to talk about that. And then safety. We will tell you guys about a wonderful opportunity to learn about how to explore that more, but that is how this all, connects with puberty. And that hidden curriculum is a huge thing. Amy, did you have something you wanted to add?
I was going to just jump in. We aren't going to go too far into sexuality, but understanding consent in multiple contexts can be helpful. Learning to say, can I give you a hug? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So consent for all kinds of
Yeah.
things, and teaching your son and your daughters, it's important to ask another person if it's okay to touch them.
Mm-hmm.
Even in a non-sexual way, we still have our bubble, and especially kids can get away with a whole lot more. But once you're a teenager, once your body begins to change, the social rules for us are different, and we are certain things that are not acceptable. A little boy can run up and hug a stranger. A 15-year-old boy cannot.
Right.
There is a big difference. So teaching your children the appropriate social rules, regardless of their level of understanding, and beginning to imply, even in teaching a mom, can I give you a hug? Right. Good. Reinforcing that behavior, so that if there's someone that needs that consistency throughout their relationships, that you have that in place. So understanding those social rules, even beyond when you get to actual sexuality and sexual relationships, you still have to ask to touch another person. You know, just because a girl on the bus's hair is pretty, it doesn't mean you can touch it. Maybe you can touch your sister's hair, but you can't touch the girl on the bus's hair. Because that may be unwanted touch.
Absolutely. And I would even say, as a boy is going through puberty, he will start noticing things and might not even understand, but will start noticing things and want to touch. And so making sure that we address that with them is important. I had a friend share a story where a boy was in the pool and he saw a girl in a bikini, and I mean, he didn't touch, you know, too inappropriately, but he touched her belly, which again, I'm sure he didn't realize why, but he was drawn to that. And so, and that person was not offended, but it could easily be a situation that would not have been good.
Yes.
And so I totally second what you're saying there. Is so important. So important.
Yes. Yes, it really, really is. And this is where, again, social stories and visuals and all these things, these are the tools that you use to teach your children about all of things, all the easy things like brushing your teeth and washing your hands, but also all of the really difficult, challenging things. So anyway, this is getting uncomfortable. Is there a book or something I could use to guide me through this topic? How did I know we would be at this point at this time, right? I think I've had just about all the cringing and trying to get through this as I can, but I hope that our conversation has been helpful. So anyway, so masturbation, and parents say, what do I do about it? Well, if and when your child learns to masturbate, your primary responsibility is to make sure that they do this activity in private. That should give you a little bit of relief, but that is the, if nothing else, the singular goal is it's their body. And if they're choosing to enjoy it, that is their choice, but they must do that in private. That is a private activity. So whether you're leading them by the hand and say, you look like you'd like to spend time in your room, it's not a punishment, right? Some families come up with different phrases or different names or different, code words or things like that. But teaching them to do it in private is the most important thing. Making sure they know you can't do this in a, doing it in a bathroom is a slippery slope, because they may do it in the bathroom at home, but if you can't do that in a public bathroom. You can't do that in a bathroom at school. That can lead to lots of problems. So again, being aware of those kinds of things. But privacy, it equals safety, right? Masturbation is a solo activity, and that's the aim, is to teach them to do that privately. And there are social stories and visuals on this topic, and we're going to show you some of those. So there are things to fall back on if you have complications, but in the grand scheme of things, that is their activity and their body. You don't need to be involved with it. You shouldn't be involved with it.
Absolutely right.
any more than privacy. That's really kind of the golden rule. So these are just some books on sexuality and relationship education. These are some really good tools, because I know we're going to have a lot of questions that cover a lot of different things. So I'm just going to refer you now to, there are some really good books and tools. And there's links to them in the handout that you'll get. And I know David's going to relink that handout. This is a book about masturbation in girls called Things Ellie Likes. They sell it on Amazon. I think there's a male equivalent. But again, it's a form of a social story to teach a girl about what she can do privately. There's another book, Sexuality and Severe Autism. If you have a child with severe autism, if you have a lot of complex concerns, this is a complex book that goes far outside the scope of this webinar. But if you are looking for a really good dig down tool, Sexuality and Severe Autism for that population, this is a really good book on that topic. We've got a whole bunch of links again that you can get in the handout. And Felicia, do you have anything else to add?
I just wanted to just say, not only with the private thing, but also safety thing, especially with boys. It's not like a hands-off approach when it comes to safety.
Sure.
There are some instances where the stimulation might be nice, but they might also be hurting themselves. And I know this is very awkward to even talk about, but it's important that you know that that can happen, and it is important that you talk to someone, you know, to help your child with safety. And Amy, I think this is a great segue to what you were going to share as far as the webinar, but just wanted to make sure I stress that, because that has become a huge problem in our community when we don't know what to do.
And I'll give you an example of a safety concern. A family called me one time that their son had discovered that he could get gratification from a shop vacuum. So that would be an idea of something that might not be physically safe. So there are professionals, and that we can refer you to if you have a serious safety concern and you're not quite sure what to do, and you feel like you need a professional sex educator who understands autism and severe disabilities, and you feel like you need that professional help. That is not the scope of what Felicia and I do, but any of the autism resource specialists would be happy to connect you to those professionals. We know some that even work virtually and whatnot, who can help coach family through some challenging situations. So that kind of help does exist. Here's our email addresses, and we'll probably come back to this just so we have the slide later.